Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents. It's the show where we take the con out of the economy. My name is Hayden. I work on the social media for the Institute and I'm here with Greg Jericho. Hey Greg.
Hey Hayden.
We've got a packed episode today. There's been a lot of stuff going on, but to start with, Greg, a question. Are you feeling positive today?
I'm feeling nature positive, Hayden.
Oh, especially nature positive.
Our government is getting on with our goal of delivering a nature-positive Australia.
Meanwhile, research from the Biodiversity Council shows the government continues to spend $26 billion every year on harming biodiversity.
The new market will allow companies to invest directly in nature, supporting landholders as they manage critical habitats on their property.
The market demand that will be unleashed or unlocked here is not a market for nature protection. It's a market for nature destruction.
And shouldn't we first stop subsidising nature-negative activities like native forest logging?
Perhaps, Greg, you can explain why you're feeling so nature positive on this fine week.
This week, the Australian government, led by Tanya Plibersek as Minister for the Environment, has hosted the Global Nature Positive Summit.
What is that, Greg?
Look, I don't want to be too cynical, but it's a load of bollocks.
Well, I've got a tagline here. Apparently, the Nature Positive Summit, is helping to build consensus on the economic settings needed to increase investment in nature. What does that mean, Greg?
Yeah, look, all of this, I don't know if listeners will remember last year, the government was trying to bring in a thing where it was saying, Australia could be the green Wall Street. And it was all about trying to get investment in nature markets. And you think, what the hell is a nature market? And essentially it was things where the government was realizing, hey, we've got a bit of a problem with companies wanting to build things like mines and fossil fuel projects and things. And these aren't great for the environment, especially for anything that lives in those environments. So how can we try and stop that or at least make it seem nice? And they thought, well, what if we come up with these nature or these biodiversity certificates, which, look, they got a bit complicated, a lot more complicated than they really needed to be because they were terrible in the first place. And by making them complicated, they got even worse. But essentially it was, if I'm going to build something that's going to take out a whole habitat of koalas, I could purchase these biodiversity credits or certificates that would, in a sense, allow me to offset my destruction of that habitat because something is being saved somewhere else on the continent, and maybe not saved, but more like, there was a whole lot of wombats in this area, but we're not going to build a road over it. So we've built up some biodiversity credits and, I can sell them to you because you're going to kill a whole lot of, numbats or something.
Yeah, it's kind of protecting some animals in one area so that you can obliterate the habitat of animals in another area.
Yeah, so basically this entire summit, and whenever you hear sort of talks about investment in nature, it's all basically about trying to come up with a way for companies to be able to pay for killing habitats, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it sounds like the problem that they're trying to solve is not that we're losing habitat or losing our precious animals and species, but the problem is that companies want to build things like mines and big developments, and there's pesky nature in the way, and how can you marry the two?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you, here's some of the plenary sessions, what they're about. Like there was one that Nature Matters, building business resilience, because, we want business resilience, not habitat resilience or nature resilience at a nature positive summit. But the subtitle is Corporate Leaders Will Explore the Pivotal Role Businesses Play in Achieving Our National and Global Biodiversity Goals and Highlight Ways to Embed Nature into Corporate Strategy. Now,
God, I think I fell asleep just listening to that.
Well, and also it's all this trying to come up with ways of suggesting that the private market and corporations are going to care about nature. They do not care about nature. They don't care about the environment. They don't care about climate change. They care about making profits. And they will do whatever they can to keep making profits. The only time they will ever care about nature is if they do something in a way that might affect their brand and that will affect their sales. Companies don't give a shit. Let's just be honest, they don't care. All they care about is making profit. And so what we have is these summits that are all notioning around, well, how can we kind of make nature part of their costs? But all it does is put a price on something that companies are willing to pay.
Yes.
And you think about it, let's say we have these wonderful biodiversity credits. Who wants them? The only reason you would want to buy one is if you're destroying something. If you're not destroying something, if you're not building a mine somewhere that is going to take out an entire species, you don't need to offset your destruction with anything. It's the same with carbon offsets. If you are not increasing your emissions, if you're actually reducing your emissions, you don't need carbon offsets to reduce your emissions. You're already reducing your emissions, but carbon offsets allow you to increase your emissions. And I'll buy an offset from someone who says they're not going to deforest this whole area that was never going to be deforested anyway, and will claim that as an emissions credit. It's all this blah, blah. It's trying to make something that is actually very simple. You think about the Maugean skate in Tasmania. We know what needs to be done there. The salmon industry cannot coexist with it. It has to be stopped in areas where the Maugean skate is likely to become extinct. Scientists have said it. Everyone knows that this is the thing. And instead of actually going, you know what, if you conduct your business here in this way, species are going to go extinct, so we're not going to allow that. Instead of that, they go, well, let's have this summit where we can talk about things like business experts and technical leaders in nature reporting will explore the role of nature-related risk management and reporting in future-proofing corporate strategy and investment decision-making. I mean, again, it's
absolute
all
buzzword
It's
salad.
all corporate PR, blah, blah, that is all based around how can we make it marketable for companies to be able to destroy habitats, to destroy things, in much the same way as we have come up with markets that have enabled companies to be able to keep increasing emissions, the government to approve coal mine expansions because they can say, oh no, it's all covered under the safeguard mechanism, which means they'll have to offset their emissions. And it's like...
And like you have this really weird situation like with the carbon credits and the biodiversity credits, which are two separate things to be clear. Like where the government is responsible for creating the supply of these, but then also the demand, like they're creating the market. So there's this weird little self-contained ecosystem of complexity.
Yeah, and also the Climate Change Authority helps police, or in a sense has oversight of the credit.
They're regulating it as well.
And there is... Let's just say that there is a bit of crossover between the regulators and the actual companies and industries providing these credits. It's very murky. And again, you're right. If the government, for example, said, no, sorry, we're not going to allow this expansion of 3 coal mines, well, that gets rid of a level of demand for any carbon offsets for that expansion of the coal mine. So, you're right. It's complete bollocks.
We've sort of seen that in New South Wales too, where the New South Wales government has promised to create this Great Koala National Park. So they've said, yep, we're going to protect it. We've got all this land, but logging is still going. They haven't actually stepped in and stopped the logging. And Chris Minns himself said that the reason they haven't done that yet is so that they can set up a system to collect carbon credits.
He won't halt the felling until there's a system in place to financially exploit the forests for carbon credits.
You have to have the system up and running before you can quarantine a park or an area to allow for that area or that zone to be eligible for the carbon transfer. If you do it in reverse, then you can't retroactively go to that national park or that forest and say, this will now apply to carbon offsets in the future.
So they're sort of almost artificially creating demand for logging so that they can take that away and then create carbon credits. Yeah. It's bizarre.
And it's behind all of our entire emissions figures, for example. We talk about, we're trying to reduce emissions by 43% from 2005 levels. And that, we're on the way there, we're halfway there or more. All of that, pretty much, all of the reductions in emissions since 2005 has come from exactly something like that, where we're no longer logging and land clearing in the way that we were in 2005. So we can say, land clearing actually increases emissions because it's, chopping down trees. If we stop doing that, we're actually reducing emissions. And it's like, you're not really. You're just actually not being as terrible as you were in 2005, which was one of the worst years for land clearing, especially in Queensland and parts of New South Wales. Essentially, all of about 95 or something around that percent of all of the reduction in emissions has actually just come from us not acting like we were in 2005. Problem for the government, who keep saying we're on track for 43%, even though that's a pathetically little target that's not going to achieve anywhere near what needs to be achieved. All of the reductions from now on aren't going to come from land clearing because we're no longer land clearing like we did. And so you're actually going to have to reduce actual emissions, and you can't just offset your way there because pretty much at best it's just going to keep you steady.
Yeah, and some gloomy news today. I saw this report out from the Superpower Institute who have been looking at methane emissions, and currently methane emissions are reported by the companies. And methane is basically gas. So the gas companies report their own emissions and they say, all right, this is how much we've emitted. But there's so many issues with like methane leakage that comes out of the pipes and all sorts of other things. There's also methane that comes from coal mines, and they've said that methane emissions could be twice as bad as they currently are reported, which is a massive issue for us because methane is 80 times worse than carbon dioxide as sort of a global warming emission over a 20-year time frame. And that's 20 years that are really important. Yeah. The next 20 years are really important. So,
yeah, and you highlight a really good point about how a lot of this is done. It's the companies themselves are having admitting. We've seen overseas with car manufacturers with multiple instances of them basically fibbing, lying about how much their the emissions intensity of their vehicles and things like that. It goes to the entirety of how we even measure our emissions here in Australia. We have quarterly figures from the government, but they can be released at any time. They used to be able to release it literally any time, and the former Liberal government really abused the hell out of it. So the Greens actually moved a motion in the Senate saying you had to release the figures within 6 months of the period that they were covering. So if you're doing, say, the December quarter of last year, they have to come out within 6 months, so before July the following year. But they're not like the GDP figures where we know every 3 months they're going to come out at 11:30 a.m. They're going to be put on the Bureau of Statistics website. No, they get put up on the Department of Climate Change's website. We don't know what time. It could be 4:30 if it's PM, if it's a bad one. There's a whole lack of transparency and a lack of, I think, rigor around all of this, where we see massive revisions, especially in things like this land use, the land clearing, what is the actual worth of those emissions, all of these things that really point to some pretty bad stuff, and that's not going to get fixed by a nature positive summit. Everyone knows that this is just it's a corporate PR move. They've got members from the Pacific Islands there who are basically just saying, hey, how about you actually help us? And you've got business members there going, oh, yeah, this sounds great. What's the return on investment of doing this? And then going, there is no return on investment. You're just saving our lives and our island. And they're like, oh, well, that's no good if I can't make a buck. And that's really what it all comes down to.
Yeah.
The federal government's making another attempt to pass a cornerstone of its housing policy through Parliament.
It's called Help to Buy. Essentially, you share ownership with the federal government until you can afford to buy the government out.
We've got a housing crisis on our hands in this country, and it is affecting terribly the lives of people around the nation.
Well, the housing minister's not being honest at all. Just in basic terms, this scheme doesn't build any new homes.
On that, we've got an election around the corner, and the government really wants to sort of be seen to be doing things on the issues that matter to Australians. And one of those is housing. And so this week they've been trying to once again, get their housing policies through, the help to buy and build to rent schemes. And they'd have the support of the Greens to get those through in exchange for some tweaks to negative gearing. And still they're like, no, we're sticking behind our help to buy and build to rent, and seem unwilling to budge on that.
Yeah, look, and we've talked a lot about negative gearing, capital gains tax, so I won't sort of rehash that, other than we know it's something that distorts the housing market, makes it into a more speculative market than actually one about people buying homes. And as I say, it's about this belief that these solutions are complex. We can't just tweak one thing and it's going to be fixed. Well, no one has ever said, oh, get rid of negative gearing or get rid of the capital gains discount and housing will become affordable. It's just that we've had 25 years of those two operating together and housing has become much less affordable. Maybe we stop doing that. And again, this rent to buy and all these schemes such as the HAF, where it's about, we'll set up a fund that will invest in housing so that the returns on that can be used to build it's just build bloody houses. Build things, or do, I even saw this week a university, Queensland University, had a suggestion that one way to help with housing affordability is, there's a lot of retirees who have got a spare room. They could rent that out to low income or people who are in need. I'm thinking, one, that ain't going to happen. And two, they're like, we could offer incentives for it. I'm like, well, why offer people incentives to do something? Just do like the Queensland government is doing, going around buying up empty properties, buying quasi sort of resorts with lots of cabins and things, and going, this isn't being used. The company went broke. Let's buy it and fill it up with people who need homes. I mean, these things are fairly simple, really. And again, this week we had the latest building figures which show how many things are being built. There was unfortunately, again, another sort of fall in building activity for homes, and sort of reports that, this is it's hard to get workers, and this goes to what we talked about last week of, well, maybe stop approving coal and gas mine expansion that need construction workers who otherwise could have been used to build houses. And less than 2% of all new residences, whether they're homes or apartments, are being built by the public sector. Back in the 80s and before, it was over 10%. We've had 20 years, really, apart from a little spike during the GFC where we had a bit of stimulus. We've had pretty much 20 years of less than 2% of new home builds being done by the public sector. You combine that with tax incentives that are driving up prices, distorting the market, and you get where we are. And yet there's this desire from the government, I think, and from politicians in general often, of, no, the solutions are complex. We need to come up with this new fund, or we need to come up with these new schemes. It's like, well, how about for a start we undo the bad stuff that we've been doing for 25 years that helped us get here, start building more public homes again, and take away the tax incentives. Then once those things are done, then we can start saying, okay, are there other things that we can help now to undo all of that damage as well, rather than just stop it getting worse? Instead of doing that, they have the equivalent of a housing positive summit kind of thing, where it's all this sort of, let's all talk about what can be done, and let's come up with a scheme that is almost, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a housing offset scheme, but it kind of is. It's in the same area, same ballpark. It's like, You're the government. You can borrow at a lower rate than anyone else. Build some apartments. Buy the apartments that are vacant now. Give them to, not give them, but, provide them for low-cost housing in the meantime while you're building these apartments. I kind of get frustrated by people always around a lot of things saying, oh, it's too complex. We can't just do, and we saw Tanya Plibersek this week talking about people saying that reducing emissions, we just got to say we just got to reduce emissions and not open coal mines. Oh, that's extreme. That's, you've got to take the mature approach. What's the mature approach to reducing emissions? Coming up with offsets that allow companies to keep raising the amount they emit. That if that's mature, it's not something we need.
Yeah, credit where credit's due. As you mentioned in Queensland there, the Stephen Miles' government has been doing quite well at building a fair amount of affordable homes and supported by the federal Albanese government. And it works. It gives houses to people who need them. And there was a big housing development supporting people, I think, like fleeing domestic violence and stuff. And like, fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's do more of that.
The Miles government, they've raised the royalties that coal companies are paying. Coal's still being mined, it's not like the coal companies went, oh, well, we'll go elsewhere. No, they paid it because they knew they were getting a good deal beforehand.
They just get slightly less profits.
Slightly less profit. They're paying more money and the government's like, great, we can use that money to actually help fix a housing crisis, which, seems pretty kind of obvious.
Simple solution.
Yeah, I'm not sure why governments run away from the obvious solutions. My belief is probably they do, because as soon as you start talking about things in a real clear way, people are going, well, why don't you just do this thing? And they don't actually want to do that thing. They don't want to stop coal mines from being able to expand. They don't want to stop salmon farming in an area that's going to cause the Maugean skate to go extinct. They don't want to stop development in places that are going to kill off habitats. They actually don't want to do those things for whatever reason, political, whatever. But that's why there's safety in saying, oh, look, this housing affordability, it's a complex thing. And, cost of living is complex and inflation is complex and all these things are very complex and we can't fix it. And it's like, well, then it's kind of an excuse to do bugger all.
Yeah. And thank goodness we've got you, Greg, to push back and remind us of the simple facts. And speaking of, our last topic for today's podcast is the cost of living, which is really the big issue for voters coming up to the election. Everyone's been feeling it this year. And the simple dimension of it is that people's wages aren't going up as fast as the cost of goods is going up. Do you think the government is doing enough on cost of living to address that?
This is one area where the government, I think, is probably getting a little bit unfair criticism. One, it's had nothing to do with the increase in prices. It's not like it's been running massive inflationary budgets or anything like that. It like other nations, just been hit with these things. Companies we know have been the main cause of it. I think they've been good in doing things like the energy supplement, which actually reduces the cost of things for people. I think that there's clearly, obviously, more that they can do in terms of, as we've been arguing with oversight of supermarkets who, as we saw last week, the way they're charging, it doesn't really have much to do with their rising costs. It has more to do with protecting their profits.
And the government fixed those stage 3 tax cuts to make them more generous to low and middle income earners, which was a great move as well.
Yeah, certainly that has helped, and it probably hasn't really registered too much yet. Also, the government's actually been pretty good with industrial relations, or IR as we often call it, in terms of acknowledging that the main problem with cost of living is not so much that prices go up, it's that they're going up faster than wages. And the government, with its IR policies, has tried to give more power to workers to be able to negotiate for higher wages, because if you don't have the power, you don't get the higher wages. They're getting massive pushback from mining companies, because they are, in a sense, they're trying to bring in legislation that will, in effect, force mining companies to pay the same wage to people doing the same job, because at the moment you can get a labour hire company to provide you labour at a cheaper price, and so there might be two people working next to each other, one of which comes through from the labour hire company, one of which they employed themselves, and they're on completely different rates, and one's very cheaper, and of course that incentivizes them going for these labour hire firms and the like. So the government's doing a same job, same pay proposal, which seems, again, pretty obvious that if you're doing the same job, you should be getting the same pay. Mining companies don't like that because mining companies care about their profits. and on a similar note, the ACTU is pushing for the end of the youth award rates, which people mightn't be aware of, but certainly if you're under the age of 21, I think you'll be aware of that. You're on kind of a junior rate or under 21 rate where you're paid, potentially up to 30% less than the award rate if you're an 18-year-old. You are classed as an adult by the legal system. You vote, you can fight in wars, you can drive cars, you can do everything. You're treated as an adult, except when suddenly you're at work and they think, no, you're just a kid. And it's like, well, your costs of living are just the same as a 21-year-old if you're living away from home, or if you're wanting to buy something. They don't say, oh, yeah, you're 18, you get the 18-year-old price for this. So, to me, again, seems a pretty obvious thing. And what we see is companies go, oh, no, but if we do that, we won't hire 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, which just makes it clear. They like to, you see all these lines about, oh, we're good citizens, we're training the youth, and they'll find some executive who, oh, I started flipping burgers for McDonald's and now I'm the chief of marketing or something. They find all that crap and make it sound like, oh, they're doing this out of the goodness of their hearts. No, they're doing it because they're cheap. And it's always talked about, oh, they're not as good as older workers or things like that. And it's like, if they're an apprentice, that's a different thing. They're paid apprentice rates. But if you're employed by McDonald's, the McDonald's manager is not going, oh, you're an 18-year-old. You can work 30% slower and worse than the 21-year-old. No, you're expected to work just the same. It's just that you're getting paid less. Again, we're talking award rates, which is the lowest rate in all industries. If you're on the award rate, you are not living the high hog. And if you're a youth on the award rate, you're on less than that. So it's about, how about we pay workers what they're owed for the work that they do, and maybe not listen to companies who we've just seen in the past couple of weeks have been very good at avoiding competition and setting prices in ways that really aren't to do with their costs, but are more about just making profits.
Yeah, I know the story of McDonald's well. That my first job was at Macca's, and special shout out to my brother who's
just like
18.
Kamala Harris.
Just like Kamala Harris.
So you're going to be.
We are the same.
VP or
probably
future
not.
Prime Minister of Australia.
Ideally not. But
have you got proof that you worked at McDonald's? Because
I do, Greg. Thank you very much. Shout out to my brother who is 18 and is a manager at McDonald's and works very hard, and he does overnight shifts and everything. And I don't know his exact hourly rate, but it's not very much. So kudos to the unions for pushing for that, and hopefully the government will listen. And that's probably all we've got time for today. On a positive note, the solutions are simple. Scott Morrison, the famous champion of the underprivileged, actually lifted 650,000 Australians out of poverty during COVID by lifting JobSeeker. That is a simple thing that helped a lot of people. And then, of course, they went back down when the sort of COVID supplements ended. But there is simple solutions out there to those problems that we've discussed. And it's up to us to keep articulating them, and it's up to voters to keep saying that they are important to them, and we'll see what happens as we sort of get closer to the election and we have some sort of election platforms coming out. Interesting times.
Yep, absolutely right, Hayden. Don't settle for complex blah blah. Some of these things actually are quite simple and are quite obvious, and we should push for them to be done. But we will have to end it there. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We will be back next week with another Dollars and Cents. This episode of Dollars and Cents was recorded on the 10th of October. And some things may have changed. You can find my column, Grogonomics, which has a look at some of these obvious solutions to complex or supposedly complex problems, on the Guardian Australia site. And for more research, especially on things to do with, for example, the Maugean skate and what really needs to be done to save it from extinction, go to our website, which is at australiainstitute.org.au. My Twitter handle and the handle I use all social media like Threads and Blue Sky is @GrogsGamut. And Hayden is?
Yeah, you can find me at Hayden the Star. And let me know if you enjoyed my time on the podcast, because next week Eleanor will be back. Fingers crossed.
Yay!
So
Yay.
listeners
I'm
will
not
be
sure.
excited to hear, I'm sure.
And remember as well that Hayden is our social media manager, so he reads your comments, so please be nice.
Yeah, tell me what you really think of Greg in the comments on Australia Institute posts.
And remember as well, if you would like us to address any issues or you've got any questions, either replied on our Twitter handle, which is at the Oz Institute, and that's AUS Institute, or you can email us at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. Our theme music, as always, is from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Greg Jericho. See you next week.
Adios.